Ben Aris, thank you for joining in. The Russian President Vladimir Putin's state visit to India is happening at a time when India's Russian oil imports are all set to hit their lowest in at least 3 years in December. This after Trump repeatedly called on Prime Minister Modi for India to stop buying oil from Russia and the sanctions on the two Russian oil majors as well. What's a broader message behind the state visit by Putin, especially for the United States and its President Donald Trump?
Well, it's to show that Putin's not isolated. With the sanctions, the West has been trying to box Russia in, and that just simply hasn't worked. India is a prime example, as is China, that India is acting in its own national interests, and it needs to buy oil and gas. And the appealing thing about Russian oil and gas is that they're offering them with a steep discount to international prices. It's a bargain that no country can ignore as a very basic import. And Trump is trying, and not only, but he's trying to bully Russia. It's in the context of the peace negotiations that are going on at the moment, and it's a lever on Trump's side in order to increase the pressure on the Kremlin to come to the table and do a deal. Putin is meeting with the special envoy, American special envoy Witkoff tomorrow, where they're going to discuss that deal. And at the same time, Trump's throwing his weight around because he also has a policy and agenda to try and increase American exports of oil and LNG. And Russia is a major player, 5 million barrels a day exported. And that's a nice niche, nice market share for Americans to capture if they can reduce Russia's oil and replace it with their own.
So, Ben, whether it's defense purchases or bilateral trade, would it be safe to say that India-Russia relations are not defined by oil trade alone?
No, of course not. I mean, there's last time they met, they signed a huge fertilizer contract. Russia is a cornucopia of raw materials, of chemicals, everything that India needs. And of course, there's also the security aspect that Russia is a major supplier of weapons as a leading manufacturer of some of the most sophisticated planes and missiles in the world. And all of these things are things that India needs. And again, from the Indian side, you want to diversify your supplies and buying things, particularly the S-400 anti-missile, the missiles, which are important for the defense of India's northern border. And so India is extremely interested in those, against on the Chinese side and on the Pakistan side. And Russia has been a good and friendly ally in supplying all these things. It tends to do mixed packages. So there'll be some energy deals, there'll be some agricultural deals, there'll be some chemical fertilizer deals, and there'll be some weapons deals. And India, for its side, its strategic autonomy is talking to Russia, but other players as well. But you need a bag, you need mixed bag, and then that gives you leverage over all your partners who have to maintain good relations with you, which is where India wants to be, as opposed to being in the polarized, West, I'm a vassal of Trump, I'm a vassal of the American camp and do everything with them, is looking to diversify the supplies of all these things.
All right. So, given how heavily Ukraine's E3 allies, France, Germany, and Britain, are involved in the Ukraine conflict, what's your reading of Macron's China visit from 3rd till 5th of December, given it coincides with Putin's India visit?
Well, again, it's sort of symbolism, stick in the eye. Putin's going to India, so Macron's going to China, but the relationships are nowhere near equal. I mean, Russia and China have this no limits partnership, and it's a sincere and real one at multiple levels, including economic. Whereas the EU is definitely in the American camp, and it has a China dependency much worse than the Americans do, in so much as it's so dependent on so many imports as basics inputs to all their industries. And I think Macron is just sort of playing here at geopolitics, and he's trying to signal, oh, Europe has got friends with China, and we're going to gang up against India in that sense. But it's not going to work. I mean, the plan has been to try and limit Europe's relationship with China on the economic dependency side. But as I say, because everybody's so dependent, including America, on things like rare earth metal imports and then just simple manufacturing goods as well, that it doesn't work. And the whole of Europe in this whole showdown between Russia and Ukraine has been pretending, as far as I'm concerned, that it's still a major power, a major player, but it doesn't actually have any power. It doesn't have any leverage over anybody. You know, France has no leverage over China. It's the other way around. Whereas you look at the Russia-Indian relationship, I mean, that's really symbiotic. That's a fair, equal relationship. Russia needs a market to sell its oil. India wants to buy that oil, particularly because it's so cheap. And they have the BRICS agenda as well. And Putin's perfectly happy for India to diversify its relationships. But then Russia's doing the same thing through the very same agency, through the BRICS and further to the G7 and beyond,
All right.
G20.
So, Ben, given the historic nature of the India-Russia defense partnership and the upcoming procurements that India is looking to finalize, particularly the S-400 and the renewed focus on national security after Operation Sindoor, is the defense partnership between India and Russia also going to test India's tightrope between Russia and the West?
It's not exclusive, but certainly Russia has always bundled together arms exports and things like energy. That when Putin came into office, we wrote a piece saying he's Russia's best salesman ever, because he would travel all over the world and he would sign in parallel a weapon supply deal for various Russian hardware, together with a gas deal. And in the West, those two things are separate, but in Russia, they're part and parcel of the same thing. And it's because everybody's interested in security as well. I mean, particularly sort of outside the global north, you know, there are a lot of wars and military threats around, multiple in, you know, in Africa, Latin America, in the Middle East. And so everybody needs weapons suppliers. And the trouble with signing up to American supplies is that you become dependent on them. And Ukrainians are finding that out now as well, because you know Trump's threatening to remotely turn off some of the missiles to withhold satellite intelligence, which makes all the American missiles they bought useless if the White House wants to go there. So that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. And the Russians wouldn't do that. And moreover, by Trump doing, you know, threatening to do things like this, it only improves the appeal of alternative systems like the Russian one.
So, Ben, this will be Putin's first India visit since the war in Ukraine began. Is India in a position to mediate this war, given that Prime Minister Modi has always maintained that it's not an era of war and the solution does not lie on the battlefield, and he's somebody who shares good offices both with Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, I think everybody's interested in peace, and even Russia's partners have all said that the war should end and have called for negotiated settlements, and various people have offered, Chinese offered a peace plan, the Turks have offered a peace plan, both have offered to intermediate. And India, I think, even more so. I mean, it's turning into a geopolitical sort of bipolar, you know, Washington versus Moscow, Beijing. And India has very successfully, I think, sat in the middle of that and said, look, we're not for or against anyone. We want mutual, respectful relationships where our economic interests, our national interests are respected, our security interests are respected. We're not going to be pawned to anyone. And I think particularly on Xi Jinping and Putin's side, they understand and respect that. Both the stated position of Beijing and Moscow is non-interference in domestic affairs, whereas the Americans unstated is basically the Monroe doctrine is like, we are going to interfere in anybody's affairs that we feel like it. You know, look what's happening in Venezuela. Look what just happened in the elections in Honduras. You know, blatant attempts at regime change. And India, as this real honest broker in the middle, is actually in an excellent position to intermediate between the two sides, because it does successfully maintain good, warm relationships, despite the trade and tariffs row it's had with Trump. But it does maintain good and respectful relationships with the West, much more than India and China do, which are basically in an aggressive adversarial relationship. So, and I think it's everyone's interest. So we'll see what Modi will do. I'm sure when he talks to Putin, you know, he'll pressure him to to wind down the war in Ukraine if it hasn't already happened. And he'll offer India's offices, if there's anything concrete it can do to help, then it's an option for Putin as an allied nation without necessarily being particularly close nation to Russia.
All right, we leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Ben Aris, for joining in with those precious insights.
Been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.